Welcome to the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes I saw while reviewing the Assignment 1C submissions for my CS 8395 course in the spring of 2024. First, make sure you're watching the preliminary walkthrough of frequently made mistakes videos and address those issues prior to submitting your initial submission. There are lots of submissions that didn't address what we had gone over in class. And so from now on, if you don't address those issues, your code will simply not be reviewed. There's no sense in me having to go over this stuff multiple times when you can take a look at it before you submit your initial solution. So let's take a look at some of the issues I saw. These are some things many people got wrong, even though we had covered them in our frequently made mistakes walkthrough earlier in the controller file, in Movies controller. So make sure you do the coding here using the appropriate WebUtil helper method. Same thing down here, also for the version that takes a list of strings. This is also does not have its annotations done correctly at all, so make sure you do that. These were topics we covered in previous frequently made mistakes walkthroughs, so make sure you're following along and not letting things lapse. Down here, this code is just way too complicated. Use the appropriate helper method that's defined in WebUtils. This can all be reduced to a single call to a helper method. Now let's move over to movies service.java. So first, make sure that you compile this pattern so it's case insensitive. And secondly, there's no need to call decode here since that's now being done in the controller for the movies-ex version of the code for assignment 1C. Also, make sure that you have your solution for assignment 1B integrated into the movies folder. Otherwise, you're going to lose lots of points when we do the final grading here shortly. Let's now turn our attention to make patterns, which takes a list of regular expressions as strings. Please get in the habit of using a method reference here instead of a lambda expression. Our unit tests don't test for that for various reasons, but make sure you do that in the code. Down here, also make sure you're calling the appropriate helper method rather than duplicating this code. There's a helper method called make pattern that does this correctly, so don't duplicate it, don't repeat yourself. Let's now move on to the get matches for pattern method. This is calling the wrong method, so you need to call the find matches async method instead of this more complicated code. Here's get matches for patterns, which as you can see takes a list of patterns as opposed to a single pattern. Down here, don't allocate a local variable, but instead use a Java stream for all of this. Don't use for each and add, but instead use the Java stream map into list operations. Gets much cleaner. Let's take a look at another example. There's some things that are missing here. This is not doing the implementation correctly. Go ahead and read the specification comment carefully and you'll see what it tells you to do. Get in the habit of reading those and also watch the video that walks through the assignment, which gives hints on what to do. Down here, this code is also incorrect. This should be calling the find matches for patterns task method within a fork invocation rather than find match async. And there's other issues here as well. So again, watch the videos and read the specification comments carefully. Now we're back to get matches for pattern. That should probably actually be moved earlier. Basically, make sure you're calling the find match async method here instead of using scope fork. Once again, read things carefully and look at the results that you're getting from running the unit tests. Down here, we have the find matches for patterns task method. Here, please split this chained call into scope.join followed by scope.result, or returning the result of scope.result. That's really a bug in the test. We'll fix that, but for now, just do it this way. You don't need to have this null check here. Let's take a look at find matches async. This code is too complicated. Using the optional of method is probably overkill in this case. I think you can just use the Java ternary expression instead. This code isn't necessarily wrong. It just could be done in a more clean way, I think. Another find matches async. Please use the for each method here instead of a for each loop. And this code, unfortunately, will end up calling an infinite recursion because find matches for patterns task in turn calls find matches async. You should really be taking a careful look at that when you run your tests. They should be basically looping and they'll time out after a while, but you should be able to detect those kinds of problems by looking at your code carefully. So please get in the habit of reading the code very carefully and running the test. Down here, this specification doesn't meet the comment above. I deleted it, but if you read the code, it tells you what to do here. This is not doing that properly. Down here, please avoid using if-else statements. Instead, use the Java ternary operator. That may require you to create a little method to throw the right exception. I have some discussions on Piazza that explains how to do that. It's really quite simple. People should be able to figure that out, but don't be using the if-else format here, the syntax, because you've got to add a bunch of extra ceremony. That's just distracting. Down here in this method, you don't need to use, again, this extra stuff. So no need to have that. You can just return this part directly without the return statement and the open and close curly brace. And then finally, let's get into convert movie matches. Don't write this code explicitly here, this code here, but instead use the future utils future to stream method. Might be actually futures to stream or something like that. You don't need to do this stuff. Down here, again, get in the habit of using the method references instead of using lambda expressions. And finally, there's no need to call distinct here. So those were the issues I saw in my walkthrough of frequently made mistakes for the CS8395 class. You need to make these fixes pretty soon. It's due on Tuesday evening. Most people did very well. If you're having problems, make sure that you ask questions on Piazza or raise them with me when we have class.